At Midlife Health Lab, we begin with a simple but deeply important question. Are squats really the best lower body exercise for everyone in midlife? Or have we been applying a one-size-fits-all fitness solution to bodies that are biologically changing in predictable and well-documented ways? Because for many adults in their 40s, 50s, and early 60s, squats that once felt natural now feel unstable, uncomfortable, or even painful. And this experience often leads to frustration, self-blame, or the belief that something is wrong with motivation or discipline, when in reality, what is changing is not effort, but physiology. As the human body moves through midlife, joint cartilage gradually thins, synovial fluid production decreases, connective tissues lose elasticity, reaction time slows, and neuromuscular signaling becomes less efficient. And while these changes do not mean decline is inevitable, they do require a smarter, more precise approach to movement. Because strength in midlife is no longer defined by how much force you can generate, but by how well you can control force under real-world conditions. Traditional squats primarily emphasize the gluteus maximus, the large superficial muscle responsible for hip extension and forward propulsion. And while this muscle is certainly important, squats also place significant compressive and shear forces across the knees, hips, and lower spine, forces that younger joints tolerate well, but aging joints manage differently, especially when performed repeatedly or under fatigue. And research in biomechanics consistently shows that joint load tolerance decreases with age, even in physically active individuals, which explains why many people experience knee discomfort, hip irritation, or lower back tightness during squatting, despite using technically sound form. However, the most important limitation of squats in midlife is not simply joint stress, but movement specificity. Because squats are largely sagittal plane exercises, meaning they train the body to move forward and backward, while daily life requires constant lateral and rotational control, such as stepping sideways, changing direction, walking on uneven ground, or recovering from a loss of balance. And this is where most movement-related injuries actually occur. This brings us to the most underappreciated muscle in midlife health, the gluteus medius, a smaller muscle located on the side of the hip that plays a critical role in pelvic stability, femoral alignment, trunk control, and balance during single-leg stance, walking, and directional changes. And unlike the gluteus maximus, which produces visible power, the gluteus medius works continuously in the background, stabilizing the pelvis with every step. And when it functions properly, the pelvis remains level, the spine stays aligned, and force is distributed evenly across the hips, knees, and feet. When this muscle becomes weak, delayed, or poorly coordinated, the body compensates by shifting load into passive structures like ligaments, cartilage, and spinal discs, which over time increases the risk of knee pain, hip instability, lower back discomfort, and altered walking mechanics. And studies in gerontology and sports medicine consistently show that gluteus medius weakness is associated with knee valgus collapse, reduced balance, inefficient gait patterns, and increased fall risk, not because the legs lack strength, but because the stabilizing system fails to respond quickly enough during movement. This distinction is critical because falls and injuries in midlife and later life rarely result from insufficient muscular strength alone, but from delayed neuromuscular activation and reduced proprioceptive awareness, meaning the brain is no longer receiving or processing movement information efficiently enough to maintain stability. This is why Midlife Health Lab emphasizes a shift in training philosophy away from intensity-driven exercise and toward precision-driven movement. Because as the nervous system ages, it benefits most from exercises that restore timing, coordination, and control, rather than those that simply fatigue muscles. And this approach is not about doing less, but about doing what aligns with midlife physiology. When stabilizers are trained before maximizers, larger muscles can function more efficiently with less joint stress, creating a foundation that supports longevity rather than accelerating wear and tear. And this approach has been shown to reduce pain, improve balance, and enhance movement confidence, which is why targeted gluteus medius training is not optional in midlife, but essential for preserving independence. The first scientifically grounded exercise in this approach is side-lying hip abduction, a movement that appears simple but is profoundly effective when performed correctly, because it isolates the gluteus medius while minimizing spinal compression and knee loading, allowing the nervous system to focus on precise activation without compensation. And electromyography research confirms that side-lying hip abduction produces high gluteus medius activation when performed with slow, controlled tempo and proper pelvic alignment. The second exercise, posterior hip abduction, adds a diagonal component that more closely resembles real-life movement demands, because the gluteus medius does not function in isolation during daily activity, but works synergistically with the deep hip rotators and core muscles to control pelvic orientation during backward and lateral steps. And training this pattern improves postural stability, gait symmetry, and hip joint integrity. The third exercise, standing hip drop and abduction, introduces controlled single-leg loading, teaching the body how to manage side-to-side movement while bearing weight, which is one of the most common failure points in balance loss. And biomechanical studies demonstrate that individuals with stronger lateral hip stabilizers show improved balance recovery and reduced trunk sway during perturbations, meaning they can correct themselves more effectively when balance is challenged. The fourth exercise, standing hip extension with rotation, restores rotational stability to the hip-spine complex, an often neglected component of fitness that becomes increasingly important with age, because the spine relies on the hips to absorb and control rotational forces. And when hip rotation is limited or poorly controlled, the lumbar spine compensates, increasing the risk of chronic back pain. These exercises are not chosen for convenience, but for neurological impact, because slow, controlled movement enhances proprioception, improves motor unit recruitment timing, and strengthens the brain-body connection, which research identifies as a key determinant of balance, coordination, and injury resilience in midlife. Unlike high-intensity workouts that prioritize metabolic stress, these movements prioritize neural quality, teaching the nervous system to recognize joint position, control force application, and respond efficiently to changes in stability.
At Midlife Health Lab, we emphasize that this stabilizer-focused approach does not mean eliminating traditional exercises entirely, but reframing their role within a smarter sequence. Because when stabilizers are trained first, movements like squats can later be reintroduced more safely if appropriate, with improved alignment, reduced compensatory stress, and greater movement confidence. But when squats are used as the foundation without addressing stabilizers, they often reinforce existing imbalances, which explains why discomfort persists despite consistent effort. This perspective aligns with a growing body of research in sports medicine and aging science, which shows that movement quality predicts long-term mobility outcomes more accurately than maximal strength measures, and that balance, coordination, and reaction time decline earlier and faster than raw strength if left untrained, making them priority targets for midlife exercise programming. Another critical factor in midlife training is recovery capacity, because connective tissue allows less margin for error with age, and exercises that repeatedly load joints without adequate stabilization increase cumulative microtrauma, whereas stabilizer-focused training distributes force more evenly across the kinetic chain, reducing wear and tear and improving recovery, which allows individuals to remain consistent with movement over time. And consistency, not intensity, remains the strongest predictor of long-term health outcomes. This is why the Midlife Health Lab philosophy centers on sustainability, because an exercise routine that feels safe, controlled, and effective is far more likely to be maintained than one that repeatedly produces discomfort. And sustained movement preserves muscle mass, bone density, metabolic health, cardiovascular function, and cognitive resilience as we age.
When stabilizing muscles function optimally, walking efficiency improves, posture becomes more upright, joint pain often decreases, and daily activities require less conscious effort, reducing fatigue and increasing quality of life. And these improvements compound over time, creating a positive feedback loop where movement becomes reinforcing rather than threatening. This is particularly important because fear of movement is one of the most underestimated contributors to physical decline in midlife, as individuals subconsciously limit activity to avoid discomfort or injury, leading to deconditioning, which further increases injury risk. And breaking this cycle requires restoring trust in the body, which begins with movements that feel stable, predictable, and pain-free. By focusing on lateral and rotational stability, the exercises outlined here directly address the movement patterns most associated with falls, joint degeneration, and chronic pain, and they do so without requiring equipment, gym access, or extreme physical stress, making them accessible across a wide range of fitness levels and physical histories. This accessibility is intentional because effective midlife exercise should adapt to the individual, not demand that the individual adapt to the exercise. And when movement respects physiological reality, adherence improves, outcomes improve, and confidence returns. Ultimately, the message from Midlife Health Lab is not that traditional exercises are wrong, but that midlife requires better sequencing, deeper awareness, and an updated understanding of how the body changes with age. Because longevity is not built by pushing harder, but by moving better, protecting joints, preserving nervous system function, and maintaining the ability to respond to unpredictable real-world demands. When you train the gluteus medius and surrounding stabilizers with intention, you are not simply strengthening a muscle, you are reinforcing the foundation of balance, posture, and movement resilience that supports independence for decades to come, allowing strength to express itself safely rather than destructively. This is what real strength looks like in midlife, not maximal load, but maximal control. Not exhaustion, but efficiency, and not chasing youth, but investing in a body that supports the life you want to live now and in the future. This science-based stability-first philosophy is what defines Midlife Health Lab, and it is the path toward confident movement, protected joints, and lasting independence. Please like the video and subscribe.